Now we take a look at section 4.3. Section 4.3 talks about percents. So we're going in and we're looking at page 185 in your book. The first thing we see is the definition of a percent, and it's a ratio, so that's why we've been talking about ratios. It's the ratio of a given number to 100. This means that a percent is the numerator, which is the top of a fraction, whose denominator is 100. The symbol, and here's the percent sign, is used to indicate percent. So they're going to show you in your book on page 185 some illustrations of the meaning of percent. It says the president recommended an 8% cost of living increase in Social Security payments. So if you look at the illustration, this box has 100 squares in it. So 8% would be 8 out of the 100 squares that we have. Percent is always out of 100. So when you're trying to illustrate a percentage, you're taking it out of 100. So think about it as money. $1 is 100 pennies. So 8% of that would be 8 pennies, if you look at it that way. Let's see, let's look at another one. So this one, 33 1/3%. There's 100 squares here. So if you count out 30 and then 3 1/3 of another one, that's 33 1/3%. So it's the same thing. Now, if we were going to change these percents to fractions and decimals, it's pretty easy to change a percentage to a decimal. We're just going to divide by 100. So let's look at some of these problems that we have. It says, write the following percents as simplified fractions. So what we're going to do is we're going to use that calculator, and if we were looking at 75%, we would want to take anything that we have and divide it by 100. So anything that you have, you can write it as a fraction and divide it as 100, and you can use your calculator to do the reducing for you. So if I pull up our calculator, and we just take it and put the 75, let's just do it this way, 75 divided by 100, that gives us our decimal. Now your calculator has a button on it that does fraction to decimal, and going back the other way, that's this FD. So if you hit this second key and that button and enter, it's going to change it to a reduced fraction. So we've just changed 75% to a decimal and to a fraction. So let's see what the next one is. 6.8%. So let's do that again. 6.8 divided by 100, because percentages are always based on 100. That's the decimal, so 0.068. If I take my calculator and I hit it, that's going to reduce my fraction for me. So 17 over 250, that's the fraction that you would have. And here's the work by hand. Now, we're not going to do it by hand, we're going to use the technology, but if you want to know how to do it by hand and you want to review the fractions, you would be taking your 6 8/10, because that's what 6.8 is, and divide it by 100. They reduced the 8/10 to 6 4/5, because that's what 8/10 is reduced, and they divided by 100. 100 is the same thing as 100 over 1, and when you divide fractions, you flip the one on the right and you multiply. So that's how they're getting their answer by hand. Again, what we're going to do is we're going to take the percent, divide it by 100. That gives us our decimal. So if it asks for decimal, that's what we're going to have there. We're going to take the button on the calculator, and that's going to give us our fraction. So that's what this looks like if you're doing it on the calculator. And again, they're going to ask you to do percent to decimal. Same steps. You're going to take the percent divided by 100. That's going to give you the decimal. And then if you want the percentage changed to a fraction, you're going to hit your button on your calculator. So let's say we were doing this one, 33 1/3. So here's 33 1/3. Percentages are divided by 100. So there's my fraction. So if I want my fraction, that's what that is. I've just changed my percent to a fraction. If I want to change it to a decimal, there's my key that does that. So here's my decimal. So I've just changed it from a fraction to a decimal. A 0.5%, I would put 1/2 in there. So my fraction key, 1/2 divided by 100. That's the fraction. Now I know this one started out as a fraction, but it was a fraction that was a percent. So it's really 0.5%. So this is the same thing as saying 0.5 divided by 100. And that's what this fraction is. So if you want the decimal, you're going to hit that button. So that's what you're going to be doing on these. That's going to change the percent to a decimal. You take the number and you divide it by 100, and that changes it to a decimal. So converting fractions, decimals, and proportions. Let's see what it says here. It's giving you how to do it by hand in your book, and like I said, we're going to use the calculator. So if you want to make some notes, here's what you would do for this one. From a fraction. So if it's already a fraction, now we're not talking about fractions that are percents, we're talking about just fractions. If we want to change it to a decimal. So let's say we had the fraction 3/20, because that's problem number 24 on page 189. So let's take a look at that. So if we had 3/20, we would take our calculator if we wanted to change it to a decimal, and we would do 3 divided by 20. So 3 divided by 20. That's how we would change it to a decimal. So we're looking at that example. It says if I want to change it to a fraction, it's already a fraction. So 3/20 would be right here. If we wanted to change it to a decimal, we would take and put 3 divided by 20, and we would write 0.115 in that chart. So we would have 0.115 here. So now if we wanted it to be a percent, it says first change the fraction to a decimal. So we have our decimal that's here on our calculator, which is 0.15. And in order to change a decimal to a percent, you do the opposite. So we're going to multiply by 100. So this would be 15%. So going back to our little chart, we had, and again, remember this is number 24, and it's asking us to change it to a decimal. So we would take 3/20, and we would say 3 divided by 20, and that would give us 0.15. And then to change it to a percent, we multiply it by 100, and we would put 15 and then put a percent sign beside it. So that's what we're going to do. So let's go look at a couple of those problems and do some of those together. So we're looking at page 189. We've already looked at number 24. Let's see, let's look at number 28. And 28 has 5/36. And it has a blank beside it that says decimal, and a blank beside that that says percent. So I would just take my calculator and do 5 divided by 36. So 5 divided by 36. So my decimal would be 0.13888888. So you would want to see what the directions say about writing your about rounding off. So if it asks you to round to the nearest tenth, this number's in the nearest tenths place, so you would round to that place. If it's hundredths, you would round here. If it's thousandths, you would round here. If it's repeating like this one is, if you see this one is repeating. So let's go back to our whiteboard and look at that. So let's say the direction said round to the nearest tenths. Since this is the tenths place, and remember you have tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths, and so forth. But if it said tenths place, this is the tenths. The number past it is not 5 or bigger. If this is 5 or bigger, then this number would go up 1, and we would have 0.2 as my answer. Since it's not 0.5 or bigger, we would have 0.1 as my decimal answer. And that's if it said to round. Now, since this one doesn't give you any directions about rounding, you're going to look at it and go, oh, well, this just keeps going and it's a bunch of 8s. The reason this is a 9 is because your calculator screen can only handle so many digits. So it goes on out and it rounds in that last place. But the way you would show this is you would put 0.138 and you would put a little line over the 8 to show that the 8 just keeps going. So that would be the answer that you would put for your decimal. Now, if you wanted to put a percent, you would still multiply by 100. And this is where it gets a little tricky. If it asks you to do some rounding, you could round and you could say 13.9%. But your book is not going to ask you to round. It's going to ask you to give the exact percentage. So you need to remember that this is 13%. And then go over here and subtract out the 13 so that you can get the fraction. So I hit my key to change it to a fraction, and it becomes 8/9, which means my answer would be 13 and 8/9%. So it's going to look, let me give you a drawing here so you can see. It's going to look like that when you change it to a percentage. So again, that was number 28. So it started out as 5/36. It asked you to change it to a decimal. So what we did is we said 5 divided by 36 came out to 0.138888888 with a 9. So we did this. That shows that it's a decimal. Then we took our calculator and said times 100, and again it's still all in our calculator now so that we can get the answer. And when we did that, it came out to 13.88888 with a lot of 9s there. We took out the 13, so subtracted the 13, and then hit our fraction to decimal key, and it gave us the 8/9. That's how we get the exact answer for this one using our calculator. So let's do another one on the calculator so you guys can see it. This one's number 30, and it gives us 1/7. It wants us to change to a decimal, so we take 1 divided by 7. And we look at this one, it doesn't look like, let's see, is it repeating at any point? Looks like 0.142, and then it starts repeating again and rounds right here. So we would put 0.142857, and we would draw a line over the 0.142857, that whole thing, because that just keeps repeating. That's how we show that it's repeating. So that's our decimal, and then we would hit times 100 because it's also asking for a percent, and we would write down 14 And then to get the fraction part of the percent, we would subtract out the 14 and then hit our fraction decimal key. So we would write 14 and 2/7 with the percent sign beside it. This is the part that's going to give you guys a little bit of trouble. Let's go on over to the ones where they give you the decimals to begin with. So let's see. Let's look at number 34. Number 34 gives you 0.95 and it wants you to give a fraction and a percent. So we're going to punch in 0.95. To get the percent, we simply multiply by 100. And we write down 95%. To get the fraction, we take our 0.95, and remember we can hit the fraction decimal key, and it will give us the percentage, and it will be reduced for us. So it will give us the 19/20. It's the playing with the calculator that you may have a little trouble with, so that's why I'm going back over this and giving you instructions on it. You need to pause this video as you go and try to do the problems as we go. Make sure you can get the answers. Let's see, let's do 46. 46 has 200%, so we want to change that to a fraction, so we would say 200. Remember, percentages are out of 100. So this is actually a whole number. It's not really a fraction. So when we write the fraction down, we're going to write the number 2. And then when we want a decimal, we're going to take this. This is the actual fraction. So when you take the 200 and you divide it by 100, that gives you your fraction. This one's a little strange because this is your decimal number that you have here, and then you want to be able to change that to your fraction. It's already your fraction. Since it's a whole number, you don't need to do anything to it to change it to the decimal or to change it to a fraction. That is what it is. It's just the number 2. So let's look at another one. That one's a little confusing for you. How about we look at number 48? So 65%. We're going to take 65 and divide it by 100. So our decimal for this one is 0.65. If we want to change this to a fraction, we get 13/20. So that's our fraction that we would have. If we wanted to do number 52, we would take it and we would put 6 1/2. It gives us 6.5%, which we want to change to a decimal. So we're going to divide it by 100. That's how we change to a decimal, remember. It's given us the fraction first in this case. So we would go over and we would write under the blank that says fraction, 13/200. And we would go over here and hit our little decimal fraction key, and it would give us 0.065 as our decimal. So you need to play with these and make sure you can get the answers. Remember that the answers to the odd ones are posted in Moodle. So if this were me doing this, I would take my book and I would pull up those odd answers, and I would just do as many of these as I could until I felt comfortable with them and until I was getting the correct answers.